Good morning. Happy Sabbath.
Happy Sabbath.
For those of you who don't know me, I am Pastor Natalie, and I am surprising the church family by coming back to visit. I was pastoring here for the past couple years, but this summer I got shipped off to seminary in Michigan. So my Christmas present to you, all you church members, is coming to say hello. Merry Christmas. So it is good to be back home in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. As I was driving down here this morning, I saw the mountain. Oh man, you don't know how badly I have missed the mountains. It is very flat out there. So it's nice to see the mountains and the trees, and it's just, you guys, we live in a beautiful part of the world out here. It is wonderful. So I know that the question that a lot of you who do know me are going to ask is, how's seminary going? So I figure I'll just answer for you now, let you know a little about what's going on in my life currently. So I'm going to Andrews University and taking my Master's of Divinity there, and it's about a 2.5-year program, give or take a little bit. It's going really well. This semester I took classes in church history and Ellen White writings and contemporary Adventist theological issues and all kinds of fun stuff. So it's keeping me busy. I found a house near campus that I share with 3 other girls, so it's very full, but we have a lot of fun, and I've really enjoyed my time there. I had set the bar real low. Some of you remember I was not excited to go at all, not excited to move to Michigan, but it's a lot better than I expected. It's actually kind of pretty. There's beaches, surprisingly, so it's not that bad. But it is good to be home for Christmas and good to see all of you again. And I've had fun catching up in the hallways and seeing the kids and seeing my youth and saying hi. So if you didn't catch me before service, I'd love to say hi after the service. So please come and say hello and give hugs and stuff. Let's say a prayer today. Dear God, thank you so much for Christmas time and Sabbath and being able to be together with family and friends and loved ones during the holidays. I ask that you would keep us all safe for any of us, any of the people that might be traveling in the next couple of days, and that you would just help this holiday season to be a wonderful one. In your name, amen. So the children's story today was very perfect. I don't know if we had planned that or not, but she led right into what we're going to talk about for the sermon today, which is waiting. You've been doing a series, I understand, on Theodicy, Adventures in Theodicy, very cleverly worded there. And so this week we're going to be talking about waiting. And I don't know about you, but for me, waiting is very, very difficult. Anyone who knows me knows I am not the most patient person in the world. I don't like having to wait for things. Some things I used to do when I lived around here, I would actually plan my schedule around when traffic would be so that I would try not to drive in traffic if I could at all help it, because I hate traffic. I don't like waiting in lines. When I was coming for Thanksgiving, I had to stand in line at security for 2 hours in the airport, and that was a pain. Some of you may relate to having been through experiences like that. It's not very fun. Not that patient. When I moved to Michigan for seminary, my stuff arrived late, so I had to wait for my clothes and my supplies and my kitchen utensils, and it tried my patience, for sure. I don't know about you, but for me, waiting on God is even more difficult because I don't know what He's thinking. I don't know what His plan is. I trust that He has one, but I have no idea when He's going to answer all of the things that I have been questioning Him about and praying for. Can any of you relate to this? Why is waiting so difficult for us? We live in a world of instant gratification. Our society runs on this, and it's so easy for us to get frustrated when things don't go our way or don't happen on our timetable. Our society revolves around doing things quickly, and we've invented ways to get rid of waiting as much as possible. That's why things like self-checkout and 2-day shipping exist, I think, because we can't stand to wait. We want it now. We don't like waiting for food at restaurants, and if it takes too long, we won't tip well. We hate lines, we hate traffic, or you know that one person that goes really slowly in the fast lane on the freeway? That tests your patience, doesn't it? I know, test mine. And you know that horrible feeling when your phone dies and then you have to plug it in and wait for a crazy amount of time before it decides to turn on again? Waiting's dreadful. But let's be real as well. Sometimes waiting for more serious things can be very painful. Like waiting for a diagnosis, or waiting for healing after a miscarriage, or waiting to feel whole again after your heart's been broken, waiting for friendships or relationships that aren't going well to work themselves out, waiting for children to turn their lives around and get back on the right track. These types of prolonged waiting are things that are painful for us, confusing for us, we don't understand, and they all raise this one common question that everybody in the world who believes in a God asks. If there is an all-powerful God out there, if there is a God that is good, why allow so much pain and suffering? Why can't he just answer my prayers now? Why can't he just show me what his plan is and end all these painful years of waiting for these things that I want, or the things that he's promised he'll give us in this life that are good? The Bible is full of stories of people who had to wait. And they had to trust God in big ways in the meantime. Sarah and Abraham, for example, they had to wait for almost 100 years before they got their promised son. Adam and Eve had to wait for the Messiah. They probably believed that the Messiah would come while they were still alive. And yet that didn't happen in their lifetime. Noah had to wait patiently for the floodwaters to recede away from the ark, and then he had to start life on a desolate planet again. That couldn't have been fun. David waited for his promised throne to be vacated. And imagine what emotions and thoughts they must have had while they were waiting on God for these things. They had these direct promises. God had told them, even with his own voice out loud, that he was going to fulfill something in their life. And yet, it was almost never instantaneous. God would promise something, but then they'd have to wait a long time for him to fulfill that promise. And a lot of times, Bible heroes went through a lot of pain and hardship in the meantime. Noah probably had to listen to the screams of people and animals dying outside the ark. Sarah probably cried herself to sleep countless nights wondering why she couldn't have a son yet. Moses led the Israelites for many, many, many years, pouring his entire life into a very ungrateful group of people, all the while hoping for this promised land that God had told him about in his younger years, and he didn't even get to walk into it. David was a warrior who had to constantly be in hiding, moving around, trying to avoid getting killed by Saul, probably sleeping in really uncomfortable places and eating not good food while he waited for God's promise of kingship to be fulfilled. Sometimes God promises us good things that we must wait for. And the Messiah was one of those things, which of course we talk about at this time of year. The priests in the temple studied the scriptures about the Messiah for centuries. They dreamed up what they thought that he would be like. And by the time that the Roman Empire was ruling that area of the world, the Jews believed that the Messiah would come soon and would rid them of Roman rule, that he would set up his kingdom and they would once again reign by his side. In the meantime, there was a group of magi in the Far East who was studying the sky, and they were reading Hebrew prophecies, patiently waiting for when the stars would align, heralding the birth of the Messiah. And in a small town in Israel, there was a young teenage girl who was waiting until the day that she could wed her husband and get back her dignity after the birth of her promised son. And so, on one fateful evening in Bethlehem, Probably not as peaceful as the songs make it sound like it was. I'm sure Mary was impatient, waiting for Joseph to find a place where they could have this child. And finally the baby comes, and we know the story. We tell it year after year. Jesus is born in a little stable, and he has a visit from some shepherds who hear the angels sing. And Luke 2 goes on to tell a piece of this Christmas story, which happens right after that moment, that we often forget. It's a piece of the story that is not usually in the plays that we do or the songs that we sing. So I want to invite you to turn to Luke chapter 2 and read along with me. I think this piece of the story is important because it echoes the thousands of years of waiting that the Israelites had, waiting for their Messiah. We will start in Luke chapter 2, verse 21, if you want to read along, or you can just listen and imagine the story. Luke chapter 2, verse 21. And at the end of 8 days, when he was circumcised, he was called Jesus, the name given by the angel before he was conceived in the womb. And when the time came for their purification, according to the law of Moses, they brought him up to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every male who first opens the womb shall be called holy to the Lord, and to offer a sacrifice according to what it is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. Now there was a man in Jerusalem whose name was Simeon. And this man was righteous and devout, waiting for the consolation of Israel. And the Holy Spirit was upon him. And it had been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not see death before he had seen the Lord's Christ. And he came in the Spirit into the temple. And when the parents brought in the child Jesus to do for him according to the custom of the law, he took him up in his arms and blessed God and said, Lord, now you are letting your servant depart in peace, according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation, that you have prepared in the presence of all peoples, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and for glory to your people Israel. And his father Joseph and his mother Mary marveled at what was said about him. And Simeon blessed them and said to Mary his mother, Behold, this child is appointed for the fall and rising of many in Israel, and for a sign that is opposed, and a sword will pierce through your own soul also, so that thoughts from many hearts may be revealed. And there was a prophetess, Anna, the daughter of Phanuel of the tribe of Asher. She was advanced in years, having lived with her husband 7 years from when she was a virgin, and then as a widow until she was 84. She did not depart from the temple, worshiping with fasting and prayer day and night. And coming up at that very hour, she began to give thanks to God and to speak of him to all who were waiting for the redemption of Jerusalem. And when they had performed everything according to the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee, to their hometown of Nazareth. And the child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom, and the favor of God was upon him. These 2 wise, aged individuals had dedicated their entire lives to God. And they had waited their entire lives to see the Messiah, hoping God would fulfill that promise. Simeon never gave up hope. He trusted that his relationship with God was real and that God was speaking truth to him. He had faith in the promise of the Messiah, and he dared to ask to see the Anointed One before his death. And God rewarded his patience and allowed him not only to just see the Messiah from a distance, but to speak a blessing and a prophecy over him to Mary and Joseph. Anna, who apparently was a widow for much of her life, as this text indicates, had dedicated her life to God in the temple as well. It appears that she did not remarry, and she lived in solitude there with God, trusting him to be her sustenance in a society that often wasn't very caring of widows and single women. Yet God was faithful to her. And after years of waiting and praying and serving God, she got to see the baby Messiah in her elderly years. The text tells us that she was a prophet for God, and that after meeting the baby Messiah, she was so excited about his coming that she became one of the first people to preach and share about his birth. She had listened for years to the cries of parishioners coming to the temple and praying for the coming of the Messiah. People who prayed for the redemption of Jerusalem, for the healing of their people, that God would send one to be with them. And so she goes and she ministers to these people, giving them hope by telling them that God has answered their prayers. The Messiah has finally come. God is always faithful to his people. Perhaps you can relate to Simon or to Anna, or Simeon or Anna. Maybe you've been waiting for an answer to a prayer, something that you've asked from God, not just for a couple of years, but perhaps for decades. Maybe your faith has become thin and you wonder sometimes if your prayers just hit the ceiling. Take comfort, because according to these stories in the Bible, God doesn't usually answer us right away. Simeon had to wait to the very end of his life until God fulfilled that promise. But he did get to see the Messiah before his death. And I think it's kind of cool to think about the next thing that he'll get to see when he's raised up one day. He will, instead of seeing Jesus' face as a baby, he will get to see Jesus' grown-up face. His Savior who grew into a man and ended up dying for his sins. Maybe you can relate to Anna, knowing that God has called you for some purpose on this earth, but perhaps your spouse has passed away and you've been living alone for a long time, ministering and missing that partner that you once had. Have faith in God's promises to still bring fullness and goodness into your life, even after that love has passed away. The holiday season is always hard. Almost everyone in this room has probably lost someone, and at this time of year, we miss them. But the end of their life is not the end of ours. As much as it might feel that way sometimes, God can still bring joy even after hardship. Perhaps like me, you're not a very patient person, and you're tired of waiting for some things to happen in your life. You just want God to show you what his plan is and just tell you what he's going to do or how he's going to make it better or where he's going to take you in the future. Maybe it's hard for you to trust that he's going to bring you success and happiness when he seems to be bringing it to everybody around you. Maybe you're young and single like me and wondering when the husband's going to come around. Or maybe you're watching all of your recently married friends start families and you're wondering when God will send you your baby. Maybe you've been at your job for a while or are in the middle of raising kids. All these things you once dreamed about but feel discouraged because this life isn't as happy as you once imagined it to be. Maybe the depression is still there. Maybe the self-image problems that started in your youth haven't gone away even though you're an adult now. And the job that you worked so hard to get barely seems to pay the bills in this expensive world. And you hardly have enough time to spend with your family and kids. Maybe you feel like you have no true friends. Or that your heart is breaking and no one seems to notice. Or you wish that God would answer your prayers and give you that better future that the Bible seems to promise. But you're getting tired and the emotional, mental, and spiritual healing that you've asked for has not yet come. Waiting is hard. Maybe that anxiety still plagues you. Or the debts still loom. Or marriage is hard work and happiness seems elusive. Waiting is difficult and the pain doesn't make sense. Bad things happen to good people. And we don't understand how to make sense of that in this world. Trusting God is hard. And we need to admit that reality sometimes. times. One of my professors, John Peckham, wrote a really powerful book titled Theodicy of Love that I think fits right in with your sermon series. Theodicy of Love, Cosmic Conflict and the Problem of Evil. And I'd suggest looking it up and giving it a read because it's really interesting. Very academic, but he goes into all of the answers to this question and examines all kinds of Bible verses, and it's really, really good. So in this book, he says, numerous biblical texts indicate that God does not always get what he wants. Humans sometimes will otherwise than God desires. And he mentions verses like Mark 7:24 that talks about how humans reject God's will. And other verses like 1 Timothy 2 verse 4, which express how God has a desire for all people to be saved, and yet we know not all people will choose to be. He examines God's love in light of the pain that happens in this world. And he says, for finite beings, love relationship involves faith and trust. Genuine love, is talking about between us and God and between each other, then is not only volitional, but also evaluative and emotional. It takes account of and is affected by the other. This means that our love for God actually affects him. And his love for us affects us. But because his love is pure, he doesn't force anything on us. Because he wants to build a relationship out of trust and faith. So why do we experience so much pain in this world while we're waiting for something good to come? Peckham suggests part of the reason for that might be because God grants creatures consequential freedom. And because of this, God's own freedom is limited. When God chooses to make a promise to humanity, he keeps his promise. So God's actions on earth are actually limited by the promises and the covenants that he has made to us because he loves us that much. And this promise of love, of true love, is one that must act on the premise of free will, meaning that we get to choose how we respond and how we react to God's love. And we get to choose how we will, in turn, treat others on this earth, and if we will extend that love to them as well. And while God's power itself is not technically limited, and theoretically God could just go out and do whatever he wanted and just blow all of us off the face of the planet and fix everything and do it all over again. Yes, he has the power to do that. He chooses to limit himself by loving us, by loving the creatures that he has already created. And because we are free to make our own choices, even a small decision made by one individual person will make a big difference because there are billions of us individuals making billions of decisions all the time. And that makes us affect one another in good and bad ways. And sometimes we don't treat each other well, so we cause each other pain. And we make this planet a sinful place to live in. God never willed this pain for us. Nor does he want us to experience it. It breaks his heart even more than it breaks ours. But because he allows us the freedom of choice and action, we experience pain while still hopefully waiting for a better future that he promises to us. To illustrate this, I want you to think of something most of us can relate to: a loving parent, or a loving grandparent or aunt or uncle. You love your kids, right? Yes, hopefully. But when a child is playing on the playground, you can't make every decision for them, right? That would be weird. You've taught them what is right and wrong. You've taught them what is safe to do and what is unsafe to do, what will get them hurt. But ultimately, you let them play on their own with their friends. And sometimes what this means is that your kid will go and say something mean to that kid over there and make that kid cry. Other times it means that your child will be left out and sad, sitting alone on the playground. Sometimes this means that they'll go down a slide that is way too big for them, and then they'll trip at the bottom and scrape their knee and end up crying. While the playground was made for them to enjoy, they still will experience painful moments on it. And as a loving parent, you try to prevent whatever pain that you can, but you can't stop them from making some decisions that will lead to bloody knees and tears. Waiting is really hard, and trusting God's plan is really hard. Believing He has a plan, that He is just, and that He makes the right decisions is difficult in a world where it seems like everything is run by chaos. Recently, some of my seminary friends posted something on Facebook that gave me a different perspective on God's justice and the way that we can relate to Him. They posted about worship time with their 2 young sons, who are 2 years old and 4 years old. And I get to babysit them once in a while, so it's kind of fun watching little kids go through their spiritual journey and how they're trying to make sense of the world and the things that the Bible teaches. So after one of their worships, the 4-year-old, the older boy, wanted to read a story that he had heard recently on his little story tapes. He wanted to read it in his Bible. And so they opened up to 2 Kings chapter 2, which is the story of Elijah being taken up in the chariot of fire to heaven. So he's all excited, and they read through this chapter, and they continue reading even after the part where Elijah's already gone to heaven. And what happens next in that story, later on in that chapter, is that Elisha, who is the mentee that was left behind, is going up to Bethel. And you might remember this story. 42 young men come out, and they're mocking him. And they're saying, "Go up, you bald head! Go up, you bald head!" And if you're familiar with the story, you'll remember that 2 female bears come out of the woods and kill all 42 young men. And you'd think that this story would be extremely shocking to a 4-year-old boy, right? So they asked the older boy what he thought of what happened in the story. And he's a very sweet little boy, so you'd expect that it'd be a little concerning to him. But he made sense of it in this way. He said, they were making fun of Elijah. Go up, you bald head. They were making fun of Elijah that he went up to heaven. And my friend posted this about what his son had said. He said, it was evident from what followed that my son had no problem with the story. And I've been wondering for a while what impact learning Bible verses has on children and how it shapes their worldview. So after he got up, I asked him the following question. Of all the Bible verses we've learned, which one makes you think what happened in this story was okay? Never know what a 4-year-old is going to say to that. What makes you think that what happened in the story was okay? And he said his son stood there for a few seconds. And he thought, thinking through all his memory verses he's learned recently. And then he looked up at his dad and he said this, will not the judge of all the earth do right? Genesis 18:25. He said both he and his wife were awestruck. He said, I know that there are plenty of things that he does not understand, and what he does understand is obviously processed in a 4-year-old's brain, but he made the connection. He knew that God is just. And that helped when he heard a story that most of us adults would read and likely question. He knew that God was just. So back to that original question, why is there so much pain and suffering in the world that God does not stop? I don't know. I've only been in seminary for 1 semester, so I haven't figured out the perfect answer to that question yet. But I think it's one we'll have to wait until heaven to fully understand. But there's one thing that I do know, which this little boy has figured out. There is a God who is just, who will draw near, who will comfort us in those times of waiting when we're confused. He may not answer all of our questions right away, and he might not solve all of our problems immediately as we want him to, but he will sit with us in the pain. He will let us know that we are not alone. He will send people into our life's path that will help navigate the journey with us, friends who will help us in those hard moments. He will hear our prayers, and he will answer them in his own way, in his own time. This powerful story from my friend about his son's understanding of that tough biblical story was a reminder to me of the simple truths about God's character that can be found in the Bible and understood even by a child. You don't need an MDiv from the seminary to read God's word and make sense of it. God is a just, loving God. And in Scripture, he reveals that many times about himself. While we may not always understand why sin affects us the way that it does in this world, we can trust his justice in the midst of it, and that there is a good ending to the story. We can trust that when he came 2,000 years ago as a baby on that starry night, so long ago, that he had our best interest in mind. And this week, he asks us to look back to that promise that he already fulfilled. Something he promised the Jews for years and years, that he's already given to us. He fulfilled that promise to humanity. And your waiting will come to an end. He still has miracles yet for you in this life. I believe that. Like Simeon, you might have to wait till the very end. But he does promise that those good things will happen. Before we close and go eat lunch and get on with our Christmas festivities, I want to ask you, if you want to do something for yourself. Pull out a piece of paper, or you could open a note on your phone or text yourself or something. I want you to write down whatever is the biggest thing that you are waiting on God for right now. You've probably been thinking during this sermon about something that you've been questioning God about a lot recently. So write down or put it on your phone or something, whatever that thing is, that top thing that you are waiting on God about. And then I want you to set a reminder for yourself. For 6 months from now, you could set a little alarm on your phone or something. For 6 months from now, to go back and check and see how God has been working in your life to answer that prayer, to answer that question. And set another reminder for a year from now. And next Christmas, look back and remember what it was you were asking God this Christmas, and look at how he has done things in your life to answer that question. Some of you might get your questions answered in a couple of months, and you'll have cool stories to share with us next Christmas. Some of us might have to wait for a few more years, or even a few more decades for some of those prayers to be answered. But know that God is with you in the meantime. He is there during the waiting, and he will give you the faith to trust him, even when you're not sure about all the stuff that goes on in this life. He will give you the faith and help you realize that he will bring those promises to fulfillment in your life. Let's pray. Dear Father, I thank you so much for this time of year, for the Christmas lights and all the fun things that we get to do and the tasty treats that we get to eat. I ask that you be with us as some of us might be traveling in the next few days, or having family coming into town, that you keep them safe. And be with us in the waiting time, God. I'm sure we all have something on our heart that we have been asking you about for a long time, that it feels like we're just not sure if you're even hearing us. But we read these Bible stories and we know that you are. You have promised good things for us in this life. And we might have to wait a little while, but you do promise to fulfill those things for us. Help us to have faith in the meantime, to trust you and not give up hope. And bring people into our lives that will help us in the journey, who can sit with us in those moments of pain, who can rejoice with us when we have prayers answered, God. Thank you so much for this church community, and that I got to come back and visit for Christmas time. And I ask that you continue to be with them and all the wonderful ministry that they do here. Be with the youth and the Pathfinders as they're getting ready for Oshkosh, and the building now that Phase 2 is open, which is exciting to see. Thank you for all the wonderful things that are happening in this place. And be with us as we are all going through different transitions in our life in the next few years. And Thank you so much for every single person here, God. Please help them know that they are loved, and that I'm so glad that I get to see every one of them. Help us to have a blessed Sabbath.